All right, good evening, everyone. We'll go ahead and get started and get through this. I did change up some slides a little bit to hopefully break down some of the timing now that we're inside some of the short-term windows, the short-term model windows. We can get into the nitty-gritty of the timing for many of you, at least a good guess on timing. Before I do get started, though, I just want to give props to the team here at the office. Obviously, I'm the one doing the talking, but we've always got people that we're putting on the slides, people that are here working the forecast, and the Hurricane Center issues updates every 3 hours. And so we're injecting new forecasts and changing and adjusting every 3 hours. And that's a lot of work on these folks. And then we have to turn around and make the graphics and produce all that. So I just want to give props to the folks here that are doing all that hard work. So let's get started. Situation overview. We've 8 p.m. The storm has now been downgraded to a Cat 2 and is now just southeast of Tampa. The conditions in Tampa should at least be starting to go downhill in the next few hours as the center approaches them from the south. But it is still a pretty good storm at 942 millibars and 105 max sustained winds. I do want to point out that there were peak wind. We did have a peak wind of 142 miles per hour in Naples, Florida earlier. And so obviously full scope of the damage assessment for South Florida will begin here once the storm clears and moves to the north. You can get a sense of how bad the storm surge was there. But impacts to Georgia, we're starting to see the rain moving now, as you can see on the bottom right with the radar. Everywhere south of basically Macon to Columbus, the rain shield is expanding north with some of those bands. Some of the stronger, heavier bands are still well down into Florida, and we'll see those moving north through the night tonight, such that by morning, some of the heavier bands will be moving into Georgia. So obviously, we're starting to run out of time preparing. I would say get whatever you have to do done tonight, and then just hold tight tomorrow, especially across the southern part of the state where that area will get hit first. Watches and warnings. We did not make any changes to the watches or warnings since the noon briefing. We're going to decide what to do with North Georgia. You can see the watches still up in the far North Georgia mountains, circling on the screen here. Tropical storm force winds, and again, the little nuances in the track will decide. It's sort of on the fence for you folks up there in terms of sustained winds. It does look like 30 to 40 in that general range for sustained up there in the far north. The caveat here is, again, we're expecting some higher winds potentially in the higher peaks with the storm, but it's a function of timing, and we'll take a look at that tonight. So if we do anything, it'll be overnight tonight in far north. Otherwise, no real changes. We do expect the biggest impacts in the far south and west part of Georgia and the south and west part of our area, closer to the center and near some of those stronger bands just north of the center. Trees and power lines down with power outages will be common, along with flash flooding. And I'll talk about that in a minute with the rainfall. Okay, let me clear the graphics. Here is the 11 a.m. forecast, and you'll notice some minor little differences, and that is in the intensity as it gets into Georgia. The new intensity, if you look on the right-hand side, it's now a strong tropical storm as it's entering South Georgia, largely because it's over land a little bit further, coming a little bit longer, coming up through Florida. So it is a slightly east, and that makes a big difference, slightly east track, which makes it a little bit weaker. But that does not impact the size of the wind field. That has already been established. It's a very large wind field associated with this. So the tropical storm force winds are going to extend well out away from the center of the circulation on this. So slightly good news for south central Georgia, but the impacts, you're still going to have some significant impacts in the far south. So wind damage, flooding, and of course tornadoes in the far southeast. And I'll talk about that in a minute as well. So I'm going to run through this. You're going to see a bunch of slides like this. I have a forecast radar image at a specific time period. I have a sustained wind at that time period. So that's the 1 hour or snapshot of that sustained wind. And then I have a max wind gust for a period leading up through that. So here we are tonight at 2 a.m. on this slide. So start top left, radar image. You can see that rain shield we were just talking about on radar expanding further north, and that'll just continue to expand north with the center itself. Sustained wind, we're only talking 15 to 20 across most of the area, maybe 20 to 25 across the south. We're closer to some of these stronger bands that are starting to infringe upon the southern part of the area. Again, this is Americus over towards Dublin. Statewide, you can see the max wind gusts are further south, but overall 25 to 30, nothing out of the ordinary from what we've seen during the day today. In fact, we had a gust over 40 in many locations today just from the gradient wind that was in place. So move ahead to 8 a.m. Monday. So here are the start top left, future radar at 8 a.m. Monday. These are some of the outer bands starting to work their way into north and north central Georgia. You can see the core of the storm is still down in Florida with some of the heavier stuff starting to come ashore. Sustained wind-wise, we're starting to get those tropical storm force winds across the far south. Everywhere else, we're still talking 15 to 25 in general. But max wind gust, again, 20 to 35 across most of the area. Once you get south of Macon, we start getting up into the 30s and maybe 40s, and that's associated with maybe these bands as they're rolling through. Now, keep in mind, this max wind gust is not a snapshot. That's a max wind over a period. So as these bands rotate, and you can see them on the radar, as these bands rotate, that's when you'll get those gusts, and they're going to rotate through time over the period of time. So just keep that in mind when you're looking at these graphics. Move ahead 3 hours to 11, and this is when things start to really get interesting, at least for most of the region, is the late morning into the early afternoon. Here on the top left, you can see what we're going to call one of the stronger bands setting up. These are the ones we have to watch, particular for tornadic activity. We saw a lot of it off the coast of Florida, and this one has a fetch that's coming off the Atlantic. So these are the ones we'll have to watch really closely for tornadic activity. So your tornado threat, at least in the far southeast down towards the coast, is going to increase through the morning into the early afternoon with bands like that. The other thing is you'll see an enhancement in these bands as well coming up into the metro, and you can see the expansion further north. So we'll start to see some of the stronger wind gusts. If you look at the wind gusts on the right, we're talking 35, 40 with these bands as they're moving in. Sustained wind-wise, you can see it's creeping north. We had the 20 to 30 earlier. Now we're talking 30 to 35, and then maximizing down in the far south in some of those bands where we're getting 38 to maybe over 40 in tropical storm force winds down in the far southeast. So, and now you can see also the gusts coming up across the south. So your 50-plus gusts are starting to creep in across the south. Move ahead 3 hours. We got 2 p.m. and I think this is where the worst of it starts to really move into the region. Just looking at everything, we start getting in the afternoon. We still have the possible tornadic bands in the south and east sector, and that's what these would indicate. Some of your stronger gusts in the main rain shield well north and away from the center. And then probably where the strongest winds we'll see are going to be, so if the low pressure system is down here, we're expecting a pretty good core of rain and wind to be on the northeast side of this. And we've seen this in many storms before as they decay and move inland. Some of the worst of it's going to be in that sector. So this is the thing to watch, is the track and then that northeast sector as it's coming in. So your strongest winds are probably going to be associated and located in this region right here, north and east of the center, moving in during the afternoon hours. And if you look at the wind gusts on the right, this is when we're starting to get those 45 to 55, maybe approaching 60 wind gusts over that period through the early afternoon. Sustained winds also coming up. You're well in the 40 to 45 range in the south, and 30s, low to mid 30s in north central Georgia. Move ahead 3 hours, 5 p.m. Center is located now southwest Georgia, just south of Americus, and you can see some of the heavier bands getting up into the metro. And again, that core is going to be just north and east of the center. The other thing to note is how dry it is south and east of it. we're expecting a lot of this real dry air to start wrapping in, and that's going to force a lot of the action north and northeast of the center. So something we'll have to watch again during the day tomorrow as this evolves. A lot of models have been indicating that. Max winds, now you're starting to see the biggest max winds show up with 60, 65s, and now the 50s are starting to creep up into the Atlanta metro, and that again would be associated with these bands as they're streaming in during the late afternoon hours. And so obviously this is going to be the probably worst of it, getting into the entire north central Georgia area, and that is our 96 county area as late afternoon. Moving on, 8 p.m. Again, still ongoing. The center, you can see the center at the sustained wind based on the Hurricane Center forecast. Whoops, let me grab my pen. Is down here just south of Columbus. And so the sustained winds and the greatest wind field is going to be obviously north and east of the center. And that will be associated with these bands here. Now, this is where be careful taking a look and being too exact with the bands. You say, well, I'm in Hall County and I've got a band on top of me. Well, that band may not be there. It may be here. It could be here. But this one particular model has the center, for example, maybe in Pike or Spalding County when the forecast center is actually down here. So you'd have to shift all of this stuff south and east or south and west. So be careful looking at radar loops of the forecast, because if it doesn't match the actual Hurricane Center forecast exactly, then your location is going to be off. So you'll see some of that, but just be careful looking at that and putting too much stock into the exact location. Just know that we're looking at the features, and these features are telling us what to expect. And this is where the biggest winds are going to be, north of the center, northeast of the center in those bands. So moving on. First, let me erase the drawings. Okay. 11 p.m. Monday, we're seeing the storm now exiting Georgia, moving into Alabama. Pretty large sustained wind field, 35 to 40 across most of the area. Although this particular forecast model isn't showing a lot on radar, there may be a little bit more out there than what's actually being shown on radar. So again, don't put a lot of stock in what you see. In fact, like I was saying, this one is showing the center to be up in here when the actual center is really down in here. So you would take all of this and shift it south and west, and that's what you'd be left with. And so this particular band is one we'll have to watch. If this happens to be in our area, this would be an interesting one. And I say that because it extends all the way out into the Gulf, and those are the ones that really can get you, or the ones that have this Atlantic or this water tapped to them that go out into the ocean. Again, that'll evolve during the day, and you can see the gusts, the max wind gust from 8 p.m. through 11 p.m. on the top right. Still pretty significant wind gusts. Again, that's based on where the track is, 50s, 50 plus, and again, so it's all going to be contained mostly in those bands. Move ahead. Let's see. Final shot I got is 5 a.m. Tuesday. Most of the rain is getting out. The storm is sort of exiting. It by this point is in northern Alabama, southern Tennessee. And max wind gust, top right, this is probably where I have the least amount of confidence in the gusts, at least, just because the storm is exiting, and we'll see exactly where it is and how weak it is. But these wind gusts mostly occur closer to 2 a.m. By 5 a.m., this is what the radar looks like, generally speaking, over here. But if you back it up to 2 a.m., there's a little bit more, and the center is much closer. So these numbers really drop off quickly. These really drop off quickly as we get into the early morning hours Tuesday. So I think that's been the trend. Even what we talked about at noon today was it exiting out much quicker. So impacts wise, no real change in what our thinking is. The highest risk zone for widespread trees and power lines is going to be in South Georgia and Southwest Georgia near the track. There is going to be a significant threat along and north and east of that center. So if the track is looking like something like this zone in here, where some of these bands are wrapping in and where the north of the center rainfall is, could also experience a lot. And then, of course, you guys out in here are going to be caught in those other bands that are rotating in as well. So again, that the center's here, and you've got a 75 or 80 or 100 mile an hour or 100-mile radius outward, that's a pretty significant wind swath for tropical storm force winds, which again can cause widespread power outages. So again, that's just what we're looking at. Rainfall. The updated rainfall forecast has ticked up a bit. We are now 3 to 5 all the way into the northwest, and 5 to 7. So if you look at this orange color here, this is 5-inch plus in this orange, and so there is a potential for 5 or more inches in that orange area that I've just outlined, which is basically I-85 south and east. Once you get down to Macon, Dublin, Vidalia, down towards the coast, it actually gets up into the 7-inch plus. And so obviously flooding and flash flooding would become an issue. This is going to occur in a very short period of time. Looking at various computer models, a lot of them are in the same general ballpark as this, so there is a lot of agreement that these numbers will be there. So just keep that in mind. It's all going to occur in about a 12 to 18-hour period. So flooding and flash flooding will also be an issue. So any of those low-lying areas certainly would be at risk. Again, take a look if you're interested in what that does to various points. You can go take a look at the various the AHAPS page that I have linked at the top. The graph will show what that QPF and that rainfall forecast does, or you can go to the Southeast River Forecast Center site and check out the dots that sort of indicate the level of flooding that's going on there, if you're interested in the flooding aspect of this. Tornado risk, we mentioned it earlier that we do think it's going to be mostly confined further south and east. SPC right now at least is thinking the same thing. And if you noticed how cool it is out across north and north central Georgia, it's largely because of the cool air mass that's in place with the low dew points. The rain shield is going to come in. We're going to be socked into the rain shield, so we're not going to have a real chance to destabilize much, which is going to lower the overall tornado threat. Not that there won't be any up in here, but the threat is much lower than it is, say, down in here near the coast, where it's going to be a lot warmer, and there's that tap off of the Atlantic with the band. So, and I showed you that earlier in the forecast radar images, which sort of indicate the same thing that we're thinking. So the Storm Prediction Center has included the southeast portion of the area from just southeast of Dublin. So there's far southeast counties. You guys are in a slight risk. The marginal risk extends up to just southeast of Athens, back to Macon, and then down I-75 and east. So that's where the marginal risk, and that may be changed. This was the day 2 outlook that was updated at noon today or 1 o'clock. We'll see the new day 1 come out overnight, and that will have also the tornado probabilities in it as well. So pay attention to that overnight and take a look at that if you're at risk for the tornado, if that's in your area. Comparison to Opal, we put this up just to give you an idea. I talked about this at noon. I won't go back over it, but in general, Opal was a big impact with a lot of trees and power outages across north and north central Georgia. There were fatalities, and I will stress that again. All 8 fatalities from Opal that were reported were due to falling trees. So with winds, and you look at the wind, the maximum wind gusts, we're talking 40 to 55 to 60, which isn't too far off from what we're talking about here. That is enough to bring those trees down, and any homes and things with big trees next to them would certainly be something of concern. So let's see. In summary, obviously the rain shield is expanding. I showed that with the graphic a minute ago. We'll see those bands get into central Georgia during the morning hours, and the bands will increase in intensity and will bring progressively stronger winds and gusts with the bands ahead of the main low system, the low pressure system. Down trees and power lines obviously is going to be the issue with power outages, certainly along with those power lines down. Flash flooding also increasing in risk, again, because of the short duration that the rainfall is going to occur, and because the rainfall totals have even been nudged up a bit overall. So we'll have to watch that. And I think that is it. I will start taking questions. I do want to point out that Monday's briefing will be a situational one. Maybe not have a full briefing package for you because we'll be in full warning operations at that point, and it's tough to put these together due to resources. So what we'll do is we'll show you the situation, talk about the next few hours, and sort of give you a nowcast. but we'll still have one planned tomorrow at noon, and that is the last one that's scheduled, and we'll discuss what we need to do from there. But with that, I'll stop the recording.